It was the middle of the night in the South China Sea. Two warships, one American, one Australian, were sailing side by side during a massive military exercise. The sea was calm, the sky was dark, and in just seconds, that calm would be shattered. At 3 a.m., under the glare of the carrier's deck lights, one order, one wrong turn, and in less than a minute, steel would tear through steel, a ship would be sliced in two, and 74 men would vanish beneath the waves. This is not a story of war, but of a fatal mistake, and the investigation that would leave two Allied navies pointing fingers for decades. Melbourne-Evans collision. Before we talk about ships involved in this tragedy, I invite you to subscribe this channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our Australian disaster documentaries. This is HMAS Melbourne, a Majestic-class light aircraft carrier and the pride of the Royal Australian Navy from 1955 to 1982. She was the last conventional carrier to serve Australia and the only ship in Commonwealth history to accidentally sink two Allied warships in peacetime. Despite her size and power, Melbourne never fired a shot in anger. She spent her career in support roles during the Indonesia-Malaysia confrontation and the Vietnam War, but her reputation would be shaped not by combat, but by tragedy. In 1964, she collided with and sank the destroyer HMAS Voyager, killing 82 sailors. 5 years later, she would be involved in another collision, this time with the American destroyer USS Frank E. Evans. On the other side of this story was USS Frank E. Evans, an Allen M. Sumner-class destroyer, sleek and fast, named after Marine Corps Brigadier General Frank Evans, a decorated leader of the American Expeditionary Force in World War I. She was born in the final months of the Second World War, her keel laid in Staten Island, launched in October 1944, and commissioned just 4 months later. By mid-1945, she was in the Pacific, escorting convoys, guarding carriers, and firing on Japanese aircraft near Okinawa. After the war, she patrolled the waters of China and Korea before returning home and being placed in reserve. But her quiet years wouldn't last. In 1950, with the Korean War raging, Evans was called back into service. She bombarded enemy positions, dueled with North Korean shore batteries, rescued downed pilots, and earned the nicknames Lucky Evans and the Gray Ghost. Through 3 tours in Korea, she proved herself as a capable and resilient warship. By the 1960s, she was serving in the Vietnam War, escorting carriers, patrolling for submarines, and supporting air operations. For her crew, she was home, and pride rolled into one. The man in command of HMAS Melbourne during Exercise Sea Spirit was Captain John Philip Stevenson, a seasoned officer with a grim chapter in his past. 5 years earlier, he had been on the bridge when Melbourne collided with and sank the destroyer HMAS Voyager. 82 men had died that night. Now, in the South China Sea, history could not be allowed to repeat itself. Rear Admiral John Crabb, the flag officer commanding the Australian fleet, was also aboard, overseeing the carrier's role in the multi-nation SEATO exercise. Melbourne was the centerpiece, flanked by 5 escorts, 3 American destroyers, Frank E. Evans, Everett F. Larson, and James E. Keyes, along with the New Zealand frigate Blackpool and the British frigate HMS Cleopatra. On the eve of the exercise, Stevenson hosted the captains of all 5 escorts for dinner. Over the meal, he told them, in detail, the story of the Voyager disaster. He stressed the dangers of operating close to an aircraft carrier at night and handed out written instructions on how to avoid disaster. Every maneuver, he reminded them, must start with a turn away from the carrier's path. Rear Admiral Crabb had already issued the same warning in no uncertain terms. It was the night of June 2nd, rolling into the early hours of June 3rd, 1969. The HMAS Melbourne and her escorts were far out at sea, carrying out anti-submarine warfare exercises. Just after 3 a.m., on the carrier's flight deck, the crew prepared to launch a Grumman S-2 tracker patrol aircraft. But before the launch, the destroyer USS Frank E. Evans needed to move into the plane guard position, a spot behind and to the side of the carrier, ready to pick up any aircrew if a plane went down. From Melbourne's bridge, Captain John Stevenson gave the order. He reminded Evans of the carrier's course and had the navigation lights turned up to full brightness, the carrier glowing like a beacon in the black water. This was the fourth time that night Evans had been told to take this position. The first 3 times had gone smoothly, but this time, something went wrong. Evans was ahead and to the left of Melbourne. Instead of turning away to circle into position, the destroyer turned right, straight toward the huge carrier's bow. On Melbourne's bridge, voices rose in alarm. A radio warning went out. "You're on a collision course." The American destroyer answered, but did not change course. Seconds were slipping away. Captain Stevenson could wait no longer. He ordered Melbourne hard to port, broadcasting the move by radio and blasting the ship's siren into the dark night. At almost the same moment, Evans turned sharply to starboard, trying to escape. But the 2 ships were now locked in a deadly dance, their turns bringing them closer instead of apart. Evans barely cleared Melbourne's bow, and then her turn carried her right back into the carrier's path. At 3:15 a.m., the inevitable happened. Melbourne's steel bow slammed into the middle of Evans, cutting the destroyer in 2. The Melbourne stopped at once. Her engines went quiet. The sea was now filled with wreckage, oil, and men calling for help. Orders were shouted, "Launch the boats!" Sailors threw life rafts and lifebuoys into the dark water. The USS Frank E. Evans was broken in 2. Her front section sank quickly. Most of the 74 men who died were likely trapped inside and never had a chance to escape. The back section was still floating. Sailors from both ships tied heavy ropes between the 2 vessels and pulled them together. Survivors from the stern were helped across to the safety of the Melbourne. In the water, some men were close enough for Melbourne's crew to dive in and grab them. Others were further away, rescued by small boats and helicopters. Survivors were cold, wet, and covered in fuel oil. The Australians gave them dry clothes, blankets, and even cans of beer. Some gave away their own uniforms. To lift their spirits, the ship's band played music on the flight deck. The rescue was fast. Within 12 minutes, all survivors were found. Within 30 minutes, they were safely on board. Still, the search went on for another 15 hours, hoping to find more men alive. Later, it was learned that the captain of the Evans, Commander Albert S. McLemore, had been asleep when the crash happened. The ship was in the hands of 2 junior officers, one who had failed the test to stand watch, and another who was at sea for the first time. For their role in the rescue, Melbourne's helicopter squadron, 817 Squadron of the Royal Australian Navy, received the United States Navy's Meritorious Unit Commendation. 5 individual awards were also presented to Australian personnel: a George Medal, a Member of the Order of the British Empire, an Air Force Cross, and 2 British Empire medals. The Australian Naval Board also issued 15 commendations for gallantry to recognize the courage shown that night. In the days after the tragedy, a joint Australian-American Board of Inquiry was formed. Special rules were even passed to allow Australian officers to take part in what was essentially a U.S. Navy investigation. The board met for more than 100 hours between June 9th and July 14th, interviewing 79 witnesses, 48 from the U.S. Navy, 28 from the Royal Australian Navy, and 3 from other allied navies. 6 senior officers sat on the board. 3 were Australian: Rear Admiral David Stevenson, Captain Ken Shards, and Captain John Davidson. The other 3 were American: Captains S.L. Rusk and C.B. Anderson, and the presiding officer, Rear Admiral Jerome King. King's appointment was controversial from the start. He was the commander of both the task group involved in the exercise and the fleet to which Evans normally belonged. Australians saw him as biased against Melbourne's captain and crew. His attitude during the hearings only deepened that impression. Although many U.S. sailors privately admitted the collision was entirely Evans's fault, the inquiry often seemed to shift some of the blame onto Melbourne. Captain Stevenson's legal advisor was banned from attending. American witnesses were given leniency, allowed to combine testimony so they could return to duty, but Stevenson's similar requests were denied. Australian witnesses were questioned under oath, while U.S. personnel were not. Much of the questioning focused on Melbourne's navigation lights and references to a near miss with another destroyer USS Larson, were quickly shut down, never to be brought up again. In the end, the board ruled that Evans was partly at fault, but claimed Melbourne should have taken evasive action earlier, even though maritime law at the time required the larger ship to hold course and speed in such situations. The final report contained contradictions, and even claimed Melbourne's navigation lights took significant time to reach full brightness, something at odds with testimony. Some facts were quietly removed from the official transcripts. On 29th July, Captain Stevenson learned he might face a court-martial over the collision. 2 negligence charges were made, not clearly ordering Evans to change course and not putting Melbourne's engines in full reverse. At the August hearing, evidence showed reversing would not have stopped the crash and that Stevenson had given enough warning. Both charges were dropped, and he was honorably acquitted. Commander Albert S. McLemore and Lieutenants Hobson and Ramsey were also court-martialed. Hobson and Ramsey pleaded guilty to dereliction of duty and negligence and were moved down the promotion list. McLemore pleaded not guilty, but was found guilty of dereliction of duty and negligently hazarding his ship, ending his naval career. In 1999, McLemore admitted the collision was his responsibility as he had left 2 inexperienced officers in control of the ship. Today, more than 5 decades later, the scars of that night still remain, in the hearts of families, in the memories of survivors, and in the unanswered question of recognition. Should the 74 sailors of the Frank E. Evans be honored on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial? Was the decision to exclude them based on technicalities, or was it a failure to truly acknowledge their sacrifice? What do you think? Should their names be carved in stone alongside the others who never came home? Share your thoughts in the comments.